Good morning, dearest friends. It is Wednesday, 16th of Sivan, June 15th. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Shabbas, chapter 16, page 121a, and in a moment, 121b, Kuf Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph, and then Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. We finished the Mishnah yesterday, which discussed in a nutshell briefly. The Mishnah mentioned that a Gentile who comes to put out fire should not be told stop, should not be told start. Let them do their thing. And then the Mishnah says, a child, however, is a different story. A child should not be permitted to put out the fire. The Gemara discusses and elaborates the opinion of Rav Ami, saying that although you cannot say put out a fire, or although you needn't say don't put out a fire, maybe you could say it's going to be very worthwhile to put out the fire. We had a little discussion about that. We discussed a child and the unique relationship that a child has to their father. The child knows his father wants it, and the child cannot be considered an independent individual. We closed off with a very interesting story of, well, actually, we didn't close out. That was before the discussion of the father and son. We had the story of a Jewish Roman official, Yosef ben Simai, and how he went above and beyond, telling the Gentiles to stop. The Chazal told him, hey, you didn't need to do that. Then he paid them afterwards, and we had the whole discussion about why he did it, etc. Today, we're going to start a new Mishnah, a new discussion, although very much adjacent to the discussion about fire. We're going to talk about placing a keli, a vessel, on top of things which would be otherwise damaging. So, for example, putting a vessel over a flame to prevent scorching or the fire catching onto the roof. And then we're going to talk about placing a dish over other similar items that would otherwise be inconvenient, uncomfortable, or make a mess. There are going to be a few different issues that come into play here. There's the question of muktzah. There's the question of putting out a fire. There's the question of handling something that's unpleasant. And so we'll break it down. Before we start, I want to dedicate today's learning to Ilay Nishmas Malki Rachel Bas Shimon. This is the mother of one of our founding members of our Chabura. He's not with us every day. With Hashem's help, we look forward to welcoming on Reb Nachum Persian, whose mother's yard site, Malki Rachel Bas Shimon, is today. And so we're going to dedicate our learning to Ilay Nishmasa. I also want to mention a prayer for wishes for Refuah Shlema for Leah Bas Esther is having surgery. And so with that, we'll get started. Let me just give you a heads up. The direction of our Gemara is eventually going to go into a very fascinating discussion about if and when one may be permitted to kill an animal which is considered dangerous. What if it is only sometimes dangerous? What if it is only dangerous if it chases you? And so that's a somewhat relevant and important discussion. As always, disclaimer, we're not necessarily, the discussions of the Gemara don't immediately inform us halacha l'maisa, but everything we learn trickles down and ultimately informs how Jewish people practice their Judaism to this very day. I'm going to share the screen and we'll get started. And I want to just show you something. We're not going to use it today, but my son Mordechai, who's home from school today, and he's sitting in and learning with us. So he told me, Ta, why don't you look at another application that maybe would be equally helpful? I'm not certain that it'll be helpful for the nature of our shir, but I just want to show it to you so you can see there are other resources out there. There's a website called The Merkava spelled with a C, C-A-V-A, and it has a whole bunch of different Hebrew texts, important Hebrew texts.
If it's Merkava, is it probably Kabbalistic then?
No. I mean, I understand why I also was wondering about that, but I have to do a little more research. But what they have here is the Hebrew text of the Gemara, and then on the bottom they have in this bar the translation. The reason why I don't think it's going to work for us is just because
2.5 milligrams.
The font is a little smaller and less user-friendly for this online virtual format, but it's intriguing. I also don't know if it has
To
additional
magnify it a
commentary.
bit more, it might be.
I don't know if it has access to the full gamut of commentary that are available to us with Safaria, but it is an intriguing application, and so I wanted to share it with you for your information if you want to study online. Again, I don't know who they are. I just, excuse me, found it here the first time, but you have the option to highlight a specific set of words, and it color codes it to tell you if it is a question, answer, defense, statements. So it's an interesting resource, and probably for beginners who want to self dabble in Talmud study, or it's not only the Talmud, just to show you, they have also Tanakh, Mishnah, Halacha, Medrash, Tosefta, Kabbalah. Dr. Stanley, you're onto something. Machshava, Chassidus, Musa, Responsa. So let's see what they have for Chassidus. They have the Baal Shem Tov's Chassidus, Breslov, Rav Tzadok HaKoyen. Okay, they've got a nice selection. Chabad, not much, so I know it's not a Chabad work or a Chabad site. Rishonim, resources on Tefillah. Let's see. Talmud, Mishnah, Halacha. What do they have? Mishnah Torah, Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Berurah. Anyways, I'm going to bookmark this, but we're going to go back to our regular platform. I wanted to share that with you. It's certainly, for the right type of setting, might be an interesting resource. All right, let's get started. New Mishnah. Kaifin, Ka'ara, Al Gabe Haner, Bishvil Shaloi Techais Bekaira. One is permitted to put a bowl on top of a fire so that the fire does not catch on to the beams of the ceiling. A bowl exposed to fire may be ruined. Well, first of all, the bowl may be fire retardant. It might be fireproof. It's earthenware. It's not exactly, it might break or be affected by the heat of the fire, but it's not flammable. So our Mishnah tells us that one may sorry, give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. One may place this over the fire, and Rashi is very specific. Sorry, hold on. Rashi is very specific that it's only if it's made out of cheres, earthenware. If I recall correctly, others believe that it's more broad, a more broad series of materials. The question would be, if you place, let's say, a metal bowl and you heat it up, that may be a byproduct of cooking or kindling, because the red metal can become red hot and aflame, although we wouldn't perceive it as on fire. But there is a machlokes if we mean dafke cheres, which Rashi clearly seems to indicate, and others. Maybe when we take a look in the halach and the Shulchan Aruch at the end of our study session, maybe we'll see a distinction. Rashi, al gabe haner. Rashi reminds us of a very important disclaimer. We're not talking about being allowed to put out fire. As you know, if you deprive the oxygen, if you deprive a fire of oxygen, the fire will go out. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about cutting off the oxygen supply. Rashi, ubelvad shelo yichabeh. The license to place a bowl on top of a fire is so long as you are certain you're not going to put out the fire. Now Rashi explains the chiddush. Why should one be restricted from handling an earthenware bowl that just a moment ago held his spaghetti and meatballs, I don't know, chicken soup on Shabbos? You're allowed to handle it, to eat from it. So why would one be prohibited from putting it on top of a fire? So Rashi explains, Afal pisha noitel kli lahatzolas kaira. Even though right now this vessel is in the service of a beam, That's going to otherwise be ruined. She'eina niteles b'Shabbos, and the beam is not allowed to be carried, or more likely can't be carried or picked up. It's part of a structure. And we know there's such a thing, asvina mina, Rabbi Yitzchak the Amar eine klinito el ledavar hanitel. You're not allowed to pick up something in the service of something else that's muksa. Rashi says, so here maybe we're talking about a scenario that usually maybe you wouldn't be allowed to carry the vessel, but here the vessel already needs to be transported, and so it can be used in the protection of the beam. But just be very careful to make sure that you're not cutting off the air, you're not cutting off the oxygen. So the chiddush here again is you're allowed to use a vessel in the service of something that is itself not transportable on Shabbos. It's muksa on Shabbos, the beam that's part of your roof. You can save it from fire, and that would be, of course, the connection between our previous Mishnah and this Mishnah. The Mishnah continues. You know what else you can put a bowl? Or you know what else you can use a bowl on Shabbos for? The al tsoya shel katan. One is also permitted to take this kara, this bowl, and place it on top of a child's feces.
Why does it have to
inside the home.
specify? Why does it have to specify?
I don't hear you.
Would be anyone.
I'm sorry?
I said, just 1 second, please. Why does it have to specify a katan? It would be, I would assume you could put it on, place it on anyone's excrement.
We'll see. We'll see in the Gemara's analysis if it's bedafka, a child's feces, or if it's a child's feces at all. Good question. So what's the diuk about a katan? The Gemara is going to help us reimagine what the Mishnah is saying. Bial akrav shelo tishach. One is similarly allowed to place a bowl on top of a scorpion to prevent it from biting. And we need to right away add in parentheses here. We're talking about a non-fatal scorpion. It's painful, but not fatal. So one would not be allowed to kill it, right? Because if it's fatal, you'd be allowed to kill it. But even if it is not fatal, Reb Nachum.
I'm just saying, it's a yom yom. Learned last week, an angel. It's a yom yom. It's 112b Shabbos, right?
Yeah, so this is 121.
I
But
know you.
we passed it, yeah. So you're allowed to place a bowl on top of a scorpion to prevent it from biting. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda presents a countering opinion, a different opinion. Once upon a time, the folks of Arav came before Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai with this question: can we cover up a non-toxic snake? Usually, if you hear the word, you see the word without the nekudot, you'd say ba'erev. And you'd wonder what is the big deal that they came to him in the evening. But we're not talking about the evening, we're talking about ba'arav. Rashi says a place. And what we're going to discover in the course of our study of this Gemara is that it was a town that in the entire history of Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai, his leadership of the Jewish people, following the fall of the temple, only 2 halachic questions emerged from that town. And this was something that Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai was incredibly critical. He says, how could you be interested in your Judaism and only have 2 questions? And we'll see there were some sharp words shared. The Amar, and he told them regarding placing a dish on top of a scorpion, Chosh shani lo me chatat. Covering a scorpion with a dish might warrant a chatos, a sin offering. It might be classified as Chilul Shabbos. What's interesting here is the question: is trapping a scorpion considered Seidah, trapping on Shabbos? Is it considered trapping on Shabbos? On one hand, we might say, although the scorpion is not fatal, it only bites. You want to trap it for a specific person, for a specific purpose, not to eat it, not to enjoy its fur, not to do anything positive with it. It is all for protection. So it's a malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa. You don't want to have to trap scorpions, according to one of the translations of malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa, and you're not doing something with the item you trapped. Usually trapping, right, in the Mishkan, they trapped animals to have its skin and hide in the construction of the Mishkan. So if you say malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa, that one is not obligated for a malacha, that one is not interested in its result and its byproduct, then one would be pater. But if you say malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa chayiv, even though you don't want the byproduct, but you're doing the malacha, you're chayiv, well then chosheshani mechatas, there's a good chance that you might be liable for a chatas. It would appear from here that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai embraces the opinion of malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa, a malacha that you don't desire the result of the malacha, you're just doing it for another reason, one might still be chayiv.
Of course, when it comes to scorpion, I mean, are you going to be able to figure out whether it's really the poisonous kind or not before you?
Well, maybe we're talking about a region that only has non-poisonous scorpions.
It seems to me that this action does have a specific purpose. It's not a side effect of anything. You cover the scorpion to prevent it from biting.
So the idea of malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa would expand to include where there isn't a proactive, positive function of the scorpion, a defensive or protective measure in this context, and it confuses me too, but you do want to trap the scorpion because you don't want to be bitten by it, and you don't want anybody in your household to have to contend with a scorpion. So you do want to catch it, but you'd rather there be no scorpion in the first place, and you have nothing really to do with this scorpion once you've trapped it. It's all defensive, it's all protective. And so that might be that would fit into the classification of malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa, a malacha that you don't desire its actual effect. If you notice, every time we use the Hebrew word malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa, I struggle a little bit with the translation for that very purpose, because in English or in our concept, we would say, yeah, I absolutely want to catch it. If I would miss it, I would be very disappointed. And yet that's considered non-productive, and that's purely a defensive and reactive response, as opposed to someone who says, I really would love to catch 5 scorpions today. And so, Professor, just to clarify, if you are a trapper who sells scorpions to museums or aquariums or whatever, then that would be considered a malacha she'tzricha legufa. You're going to be catching the scorpion and selling it to a museum or to an aquarium or whatever for educational purposes. Again, not to get too well, the Gemara we'll let the Gemara talk more about it, but it would ask a similar question about trapping mice. Most people that trap mice are not interested in having mice in their house. They'd much prefer that there were no mice at all. But if they do get in the house, they'd rather catch it than let it, run around. And so that might be considered malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa. But if you are a person that sells mice to zoos to feed their snake population, that might be considered malacha she'ena tzuricha legufa, because you're actually going to go to the places where the mice are because you want them. Rebel?
Rabbi, but I'm surprised that they don't, because some of those scorpions are poisonous, the bite. It's not that
We are
simple.
talking about.
You can't tell by looking at it, maybe.
We're talking about that they could.
I mean, some people died in Israel just a few months ago in the Negev from scorpion bite.
Right. So when I was in Israel, I remember we had one of the summer programs. I was in Sfat, and Sfat has scorpions, as I recall. I don't think they were poison. I don't think they were fatal, but I do remember one of the students was bit by a scorpion. We had to take them to the hospital, and Baruch Hashem, they lived to tell the tale.
When we slept in the fields, we always had to check our shoes before we put them on, the army shoes, to make sure there are no scorpions in there before we put them on.
and those were fatal scorpions. I don't know if that's the right classification to call them fatal, but they
Well,
were.
either way, I don't want to get bitten. I don't care if it's,
You
You
don't want to be
Unfortunately
bitten
not.
by a non.
and I'm not a zoologist, and none of us were. So,
Unfortunately, by the time you find out it was poisonous, might be a
true.
little late.
Rabbi, does that pertain to a mosquito or a bee or a wasp?
So it's a perfect question. The Gemara in just a few lines is going to start talking about other animals of the similar genre, or really a scale from absolutely fatal to uncomfortable to annoying. And so we're going to get into that a little bit in a moment. So really, the Mishnah in a vacuum is simply discussing the question of a few scenarios where you might want to use a bowl to prevent something unpleasant, to prevent your beam from catching on fire, to avoid any uncomfortable encounters with feces, to keep a scorpion from hurting, bothering, scaring somebody in your household. The Mishnah seems to indicate all of these are acceptable, which is a little bit of a chiddush, because feces is probably muksa, and the beam is muksa, and you don't want to. Firefighting is generally not seen as a Shabbos kind of event, and the big chiddush here, a scorpion being trapped. Rabbi Yehuda brings a dissenting view, which is the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, where perhaps it would be a problem to trap a scorpion. And there's a lot of scholarship about what exactly his problem would be. Either the scorpion is not threatening anybody's life. If it was, you would obviously be allowed to kill it. Well, let's see the Gemara, where everything gets interesting. We're going to start off with an interesting story, and a story like many of the stories we see, where the Chachamim each we're not robots, they have personalities, and could be insulted or mistreated. Let's see. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Rabbi Chanan bar Rava, three rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yirmiyah, and Rabbi Chanan bar Rava, Iklu lebei Avin de min Nishakya. They arrived to the home of Avin of Nashakaya, which was in Bavel, I believe. Talking about Babylonian sages, in a place called Nashakaya.
It was named after me.
Mm?
It was named after me.
Oh, yeah?
Nash.
Ah, Nashakaya. That
We
was
cut
your
it
Russian.
short.
That was your Russian name before they shortened it. Okay. So here's what happens. Three rabbis arrive in town. They come to the house of Avin. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Aisu lahu por yasa. The first two rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yirmiyah, they received beds, which may have not been for sleeping, but for sitting. The Rav Chanan bar Rava lay isolate, but Rav Chanan bar Rava did not get a bed, which maybe today would be the equivalent of a couch or a chair. Rashi says, "V'hishivu la'aretz," and he is compelled to sit on the floor. He was not happy. Ashkechina masne le'livrei. He chances upon his host studying with his son. And what did he hear them saying? V'altsoya shel katan. He was reading from our Mishnah and said that you're allowed to put a bowl on top of the tsoya that belongs to a katan, mipnei katan, to avoid the kid getting dirty or another child getting dirty in these child feces. Rashi. So the kid doesn't crawl into this person child waste. So that's what Rav Chanan bar Rava overhears his host, who didn't treat him super hospitably. Omar Lei, his response was probably not in accordance to the ultimate etiquette of the time. Ovin shatya masne shtusa livnei. Ovin the shaita, Ovin the fool, is teaching foolish teachings to his son. Any clue about how Rav Chanan felt towards his host? Rav Chanan shayakoyus. In case you had any doubts, Rashi explains. Rav Chanan shayakos umiskaven laknita Rav Avin. Rav Chanan was upset. He was angry that he wasn't treated right. He was not given a seat. He was expected to sit on the floor. And so he was pressing buttons. He was provoking his host, Rav Avin. If I was Rav Avin, I'd say, I'd let you in my house. That's got to be worth something. But interestingly enough, Rav Avin, well, here's what I understand. It could be Rav Chanan thought there were more chairs, and he just thought he didn't give him any more chairs. But maybe they were actually out. They had no more chairs. And so 3 rabbis visit. You give the senior rabbi first. You give the second in prestige, the second chair, and the third guy will have no choice but to sit on the ground. What else should he do? But when he calls out Avin, he says, "You're teaching your kids silliness. You're a fool." Child feces is not muksa. You know why? It can be carried around because it could be given to dogs. This child waste is not muksa. Carry it away and go give it to the dogs. I don't know exactly how that works, and if that works today, I can only tell you what I see here in the text. Suffice it to say, Rav Chanan is telling Avin,
I can confirm that like maybe 70 years ago, I witnessed how a dog eats feces.
dogs eat feces?
Yeah. Of course, it was during the time of the war, and food for people was scarce, and it was even more scarce for dogs. So I'm not sure whether the dog would eat it in more fortunate times. But yes, I did see how a dog ate feces.
So thank you, Professor. The professor is clarifying, if there's a time where food is scarce, humans are not going to give food to dogs. And so dogs reasonably have been seen subsisting on human feces, where there's some food byproduct and otherwise edible organic material. Now, Professor, I want to thank you. And this is this is not the full extent of the wisdom you bring to the table. You also bring life experience. And I also recall you sharing with us in the past that waste could be used as fuel. So it's a reminder that notwithstanding the alarming headlines and talking heads on TV, we are still need to be very thankful and grateful for the blessings, prosperity, and availability that we have today, notwithstanding legitimate difficulties that also exist.
Also the use for fertilizer.
Right? So basically, Rav Chanan says, child waste is not muksa. Go bring it to your dog. He asked muchenes leklavim, it's not muksa. So the Gemara, or Rav Avin, Rav Chanan, or Avin says, or the Gemara maybe says in representation. Maybe you'll say, you know why it's muksa? Because this human waste was not around yesterday, it was produced today. Rashi, Shayim Nolda, it only appeared today on the scene. So maybe you'll think it's muksa. Vatanya, a brisa teaches that certain things that are so predictably going to arrive that it's not considered noilad, we assumed and counted on it. Naharais hamoishchin, umayonas hanoivin, rivers that are flowing, springs that flow forth. Hareheim, kiragle, Adam, they are just like something that's ever present and ever available. And if I understand correctly, we are going to expand this theme to include fecal matter, which is pretty predictably available every day.
And by
Rashi,
the same token, we can say that chickens can lay eggs. That's quite predictable. But nevertheless, we do consider eggs nolad.
that's a very good question. That's a very good question. Why is an egg considered nolad if this feces is not? It is such a good question
You have
that it's asked.
the whole Baba Bea.
It's such a good question that it's here in the Ramban. Ika the kashle mahida gersina b'seches beya. The question from what we know in Gemara Beya. B'tarna goylas amedus legadol beitzim muksa hu v'amai v'afal pish tarna goylas amedus legadol beitzim given Davido the also date alayu beitzim gufay lechilakami. So exactly your question. Eggs too, especially if you raise the chickens for eggs and you do whatever manipulation necessary to inspire the chickens to lay the hen to lay daily eggs. The answers, the question is for me easier than the answer. Here, I think he says, it's possible that when the Mishnah says that an egg is muksa, it's only because those eggs are going to become chicks. Or maybe the designation and the use of those eggs were changed. And so initially they were not intended to be used for eating because they were going to be for chickens.
Rabbi.
Hold on. Interesting. He says the chicken is also muksa. And so the egg comes from an item that's already muksa, whereas humans are not muksa and the fecal matter is not muksa. So this needs more study. It's a very good question. My point over here was not to give a comprehensive response, but more to show you that it's a very good question that is explored by the Rishonim. So thank you, Professor. Beryl?
Rabbi, it just occurred to me, do we have the same problem with milk from a cow?
Well, there's a different problem from a cow, which is you're not allowed to milk a cow on Shabbos to use its milk. They can be, remember we had this discussion, maybe they can be milked to alleviate their pain, but so possibly, but I don't want to go there because I would want to revisit that.
It just occurred to me for the first time.
Good question.
Comparing it to an egg.
The Gemara answers, let's read that Rashi. Mishum demidi denoyedu, something that is constantly moving, flowing. Come on. Just like water, we say that although the water comes from out of the tchum, it can be accessed. Being that the water constantly flows, you expect and anticipate it. Being that a child predictably, and I suppose all human beings go to the bathroom. He says, as soon as my kid goes to the bathroom, I'll go feed the dogs. And so therefore it is on or in there. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. All right. So the Gemara, so again. So Rabbi Oven is teaching his son that child waste is muktzah, but you're allowed to cover it with a dish. Rav Chanan says, you're crazy. It's not muktzah at all. You should just carry it away. You don't need to cover it up, carry it away. So Rav Oven, in humility, engages in the guy who's trying to provoke him. So how do we understand the Mishnah? So Rav Chanan answers, Ema al tsoya shel tarnagolim mipnei katan. The Mishnah needs to be read a little differently. So was it the professor, was it Dr. Stamler who asked the question about the Mishnah? What's the situation with the tsoya of a katan? So we didn't change the actual words of the Mishnah. We understand the shorthand of the Mishnah differently. Now the Mishnah says, tsoya katan. We can cover up the tsoya of a tarnagol, which is muktzah. Mipnei katan, to keep the kids from making a mess. Rashi. Soya shel tarnagolim, diloi chazya liklavim. Dogs, you can't feed chicken waste. Vishel katan diktani masnisin. What does it mean, shel katan? Not shel katan. You cover it to prevent the effects of the katan. Shemitafeach b'katan ka'amar. B'shvil ha'katan amar koifim. Because we don't want the kid to jump in the chicken poop, you can cover it up. So Gemara is not done yet. You should yet be allowed to transport the chicken waste because it's like a garv sharei, a chamber pot of feces, which we're allowed to move it out of the room because it's disgusting and not Shabbos spirit. Rashi, demoyis, it's gross. As in Gemara Bay it says, you're allowed to move a pot of refuse, of waste, you're allowed to move it to the garbage. So, even though it's chicken waste, it should be allowed to be removed and it shouldn't need to be covered. Maybe you'll think that the problem here is that with a chamber pot, you move the pot. But EU Gufei law, you're not allowed to handle the waste, the chicken feces on its own. That's not so. Because we have a story of a achbar, we have a mouse. The shtakach is par makid Rav Ashi. A mouse was once found in Rav Ashi's spice cabinet, cupboard. And he told them, Amar Luhu, he instructed his staff, Niktua bitsut sise va'afkua. Grab it by its tail and get it out of here. So what we see here is an item that is ma'os can be handled directly and not just from a keli. You're allowed to remove something that's gross from your home. So the more answer is, you know why you can't move it? You know why you can only cover it? Because ba'ashba, it's already in the place of the garbage. Rashi, Mashani ba'ashba, dilay romikamayu v'leger shareyu. You cannot remove it because it's not considered. It's not waste in the home. It's already in the garbage. So the Gemara says, why is a kid running around the garbage heap that you're afraid they'll step in the animal waste? A child doesn't belong in the garbage heap. So the Gemara revises and says, b'chatzer. We're talking about that it's sitting in the chatzer. Oh, 1 second, but in a chatzer, you're allowed to remove something that's disgusting. Chatzer navi gav sharehu. It's a pot or it's a collection of refuse that can be moved. So our answer is ba'ashba shabachatzer. We're talking about it's the trash heap that's in the courtyard, but kids are around, but it can't be removed because it's muksa and it's already in the destination, but you can cover it up to prevent the kid from getting dirty. Rashi, initially we thought we're talking about just a regular courtyard. So it's in a place where garbage goes. But even as garbage goes, waste is something that is more prone to creating a mess, and so you can cover it up to avoid the child getting into it on Shabbos. So there you have it, an interesting situation. So according to our Gemara, child waste would actually not be muksa, but anything that can be fed to dogs is not muksa, and other things like chicken waste is. When we finish this Gemara, we'll take a look in the Shulchan Aruch and we'll see if this is codified halacha le-maisa. Actually, no, we should do that now. So give me a moment. Let's see what we have linked here.
I've never seen a dog eat feces.
Alan, you've been privileged to live, Baruch Hashem, in a time of plenty. And so we give dogs dog food. But those who lived in places where life was not always rosy, I don't mean to say that life was always rosy, Alan. I don't mean to. I'm just saying that if we lived in Canada and the US for the last 100 years, we probably haven't seen the greatest extent of human misery. Whereas if you lived in Europe or in the Soviet Union and in the wrong times, they've seen, at least that's what we have testimony here from Professor Stern.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
people today spend more money on their dog food than on the food for their children.
right. Well, many people don't have children. Their children are their dogs.
The dogs behave better.
So let's see if this is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. So let's see. This is in the laws of Muktzah. Kol davar metunaf, anything that's gross. Going rei, like human waste, viki, vomit, soya, and fecal feces. Bein shel adam, bein shel tanagar, whether it's human or chicken. If they were placed in a place, in a courtyard where people hang around, mutar lahaitziam laashpa, they may be removed to the garbage. Thank you. Oy lebeis akise, or to a bathroom-like environment. The afilu b'loy kli, even without a vessel but handled directly. The imhayu b'chatzor she'nei darsham, but if they were placed somewhere that people aren't living, also leitziam, you cannot remove them. Im yarei mipnei atinoik shelo yislach lech ba, if you're afraid of a child getting dirty, but it's not affecting your quality of life, mutar lechapois or lichpois ala kli. Well, that's the time that you pull out your handy dandy kli cheres. You finish your chicken soup and you cover it up, and that way you can avoid the child getting dirty, but also not transgress or get into trouble with the laws of Muktzah. Give me a fast moment. Oh, that's what's wrong. We're in the wrong, so hold on. Why did we lose our place? 1 second. Shimches Lamed Daled. Oh, here, okay. Shimches Lamed Daled. Mishnah Berurah. You see, he quotes our Gemara, the Achbar Meis, Hanimsa Motal Yitzia V'Yadayim Mitam Graf Sharei. It's not exclusively human waste, but even a rat, like we saw in our Gemara. But that's only people live there. Places that's part of human living. Anyways, there you got it. That's the first stage, the first discussion of our Mishnah. Now let's see the next discussion, oh wow, it's late. We're going to see the discussion about dangerous, hazardous critters. Our Mishnah says, allowed to place that same vessel on top of a scorpion to not bite. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi taught. Kol hamazikim neharagim b'Shabbos. Any kind of animal that's a mazik, that's harmful, and Rashi says hahorgim, that are lethal creatures, they're killed on Shabbos. Now that's pretty straightforward, but not entirely straightforward. Because can you go hunting for these lethal animals, or only if they come to you? Is there a spectrum? So for that, we're going to see the Gemara is going to continue. Rashi, neharagim b'Shabbos, v'kosal kadaitach afilu ein rotzen acharav. At this point, we think maybe this is even if you're not being chased. Umishum desvirle ki Rabbi Shimon. Maybe Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is very permissive to kill these dangerous creatures because he holds like Rabbi Shimon that what? The malacha she'ena tzricha legufa, the prohibition of any malacha that you don't actually need its effect, its byproduct, is midrabanan. The isura, the hachalei gazer. The whole prohibition of malacha she'ena tzricha legufa is only the rabbanan, and so the rabbis did not extend their prohibition to dangerous items. That's what we understand at this point in the Gemara. Masir Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef has a challenge. What's the challenge? There's a brisa that seems to be a little more nuanced. It says, Chamisha nerogim b'Shabbos. There are 5 creatures that are to be killed on Shabbos. And here now we're going to get a list of what was known in those days to be extremely lethal. Zivuv, Shabaris Mitzrayim, the fly, the Egyptian fly, Vitzira Sheben Ninveh, and the wasp of Ninveh, the Akrav Shebe Chadyav, and the scorpion of Hadyav. That's how Rabbi Steinsaltz translates it. Chadyav, where's Chadyav? Probably somewhere in northern Iraq. The Nachash Eretz Yisrael, an Israeli snake, the Kelev Shoita b'chol makom, and a rabid dog or a mad dog in any place. Doctor, I'm sorry. Did someone say? So, is the rule kol hamazik in erogim b'Shabbos? You can kill any mazik, or do we have a special set of 5 dangerous animals that are presumed to be toxic? So Rabbi Yosef continues. Money. Who is the author of the teaching of the 5 items that can be killed? And now we're going to wade into the question of malacha she'ena tzricha leguf. Ilema Rabbi Yehuda. If you think it's Rabbi Yehuda, who is more strict in the realm of malacha she'ena tzricha legufa? Ha'amar, he's the one that teaches malacha she'ena tzricha legufa, a malacha which you do not need its common purpose, its main function. For example, trapping, which is usually for the purpose of having the animal's fur or to sell it or for some kind of commercial purpose. Well, Rabbi Yehuda says one is yet chayiv, malacha she'ena tzricha legufa chayiv aleha. You're still chayiv. Elo lam Rabbi Shimon. We must conclude that the author of this teaching that says you can kill these 5 animals, it's Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is the one that says malacha she'ena tzricha legufa pater, that if you do not need its main purpose or its defined purpose, you're exempt. And yet, even though he says generally speaking, malacha she'ena tzricha legufa pater hanihu deshari, he still only permits 5 critters, achrine loi, but other creatures no, and included in that would be
Rabbi.
Hold on. Other creatures cannot be killed, which is a contradiction to Rabbi Shua ben Levi, who says kill all the critters. Rebel, go ahead.
No, it's strange because the 5 that he lists, they're certainly more dangerous. Are we to presume a lion, a tiger, etc., you're not allowed?
So let's see. Maybe. There's no heter for you to go into a safari to hunt lions because they're dangerous.
No, but common sense.
So I think we're talking about items that are. I mean, my initial reaction, although maybe I'll change it, is that here we're talking about things that you come into contact with more frequently. In Egypt, you're gonna encounter those flies and these scorpions or rabid dogs. Those are things you encounter. Lions are less frequently present, at least today. You know, once upon a time, it seems like
there are wild cats in the desert historically. Anyway.
I would assume you can do a kal vachomer.
Yeah, for
Go
sure.
ahead.
If you're allowed to kill a fly, we don't ask a shaila about a lion.
So here we're talking about. I have to clarify. Rashi said this actually. Afilu ein rotzen achrav. We're talking about you can kill them even if they aren't chasing you. Mishum desirle the stomach harganim. Even if you're not in immediate danger, the presumption is that they're going to be a threat. So you can kind of preemptively kill them. The
Rabbi,
halachic, hold on one
determination
second.
is,
Hold on. The halachic authorities explain that this brisa is more expansive. It just means only the super, super toxic, super dangerous critters. Let's see how the Gemara develops this, because we're still in flux. So we had a question of Rav Yosef challenging Rabbi Shimon Levi. He says, I have a list of only specific creatures that can be killed. This would be contradictory to Rabbi Shimon Levi. I'm Rav Yirmiyah. So Rav Yirmiyah says, maybe this brisa is a unauthorized, unauthoritative text. Maybe it's corrupt. How do I know mitiratzta that it's good? Maybe this is a brisa that we have a problem in the tradition. Maybe it needs to be amended. So Rav Yosef answers, Omar Rav Yosef, I taught the brisa, and I have the problem. I had a question. And I will also provide the explanation. I will provide the reconciliation between our different sources. It's my brisa. I've studied it. I know that it's accurate. And I'll explain to you how it means. Now, what does it mean here? Is it a good brisa or a bad brisa? So apparently, there were two sources, or more, but there were a few sources of authorized, verified, validated brises, and those were the brises taught by Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oishia. There were other traditions that were floating around that were not included in their canon of braitot, and they needed to be independently verified. And so Rav Yosef is saying is, although this brisa is not part of the tradition that was taught by Rav Chia and Rav Oishia, I personally was taught it by my teachers, and I can vouch for its authenticity. I want to just read from you here from the way it's explained in the art scroll. It's clear from the Gemara that this particular brisa was not part of the official collection of redacted brises by Rav Chia and Rav Oishia. The brises that are not part of that collection are not relied upon unless there was if someone could specifically make the case that they researched, investigated, and clarified its authenticity. So Rav Yosef says, I know this brisa. I taught it, or I was taught it. I asked the question, and I will explain how this makes sense with Rabbi Shimon Levi's teaching.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
how common do we have something like this? Is it a common thing to say the Baraita is
No. You didn't hear what I said. There's a collection of brises that are like the authorized version. Let's back up just for a brief moment. The oral tradition included many important teachings in clarifying halachot. Sometimes the same teaching could be recorded in more words or less words, or with more nuance or less nuance. Sometimes there could be conflicting teachings. All of those teachings that were part of the oral tradition were sorted through by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and he made a precise collection of teachings that were canonized as the Mishnah. There were additional teachings. In that oral tradition, more elaborate, and maybe they didn't qualify for the Mishnah, which the whole goal of the Mishnah was to be extremely concise, nuanced, and in a specific format. But they were essentially elaborative texts from the same era called braitot. The work of the brises were also an authorized work, edited, collected, compiled by sages of the same era, Rabbi Chia and Rav Oishia. Rabbi Chia and Rav Oishia were colleague and students of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who canonized, put together the Mishnah. But there were other braitot, which were part of the extra Mishnaic traditions that private families or private lineages of teachers and students had. But those were not known to the masses, and therefore there was an additional security measure to verify their authenticity.
Rabbi.
And so hold on one second.
Terrific answer, but not to my question.
No, listen to what I'm about to say next. You're not, if you're already asking the question, then you're not listening.
I'm listening.
Rabbi Yosef is introducing a teaching which his contemporaries knew were not part of the authorized edition of the Braitot, and therefore it's challenged. And how do we know that it wasn't part of the original collection of Braitot? Because the question of, is this a verified Braita? I don't recognize it. Maybe it was intentionally rejected because it's inaccurate. And so Rav Yosef says, no, I have this on good authority, and I'll explain it to you. And so, Rebera, what was your question? Does this happen often?
My question was, how often do we have an occasion when somebody says, I know this Baraita, I taught it, I'm the authority? It seems to me rather
No, he's not saying I'm the
unusual.
authority. Listen to what he says. I taught it because I have it as a tradition. The person who introduced a question mark about the Braita was me. But I introduced the question to make a point, which I'm going to explain. So he's saying, oh wow, it's already 11:01. He's saying, don't challenge the credibility of the Braisa. I'm the one that introduced it to you. I'm the one that raised the red flag with the purpose of providing the clarification.
How common do we have something like this?
Common enough.
Where the guy says, I taught it. My Baraita.
No, he's not saying I invented this. I'm the one that I have it. I'm the one that brought it to the floor today.
Okay.
And for tomorrow, you have to come back tomorrow to hear how he explains this brisa and how he makes it make sense with Rabbi Shulman Levi's teaching that you can kill any critter. I want to thank you for joining us today for another wonderful foray into the Talmud. Please join us tomorrow, same time, same place, same link, so we can continue discussing dangerous animals on Shabbat. One of the important and ever-present questions that we ask on Shabbos. Next up, please rejoin the link to study today's Chumash.
Shikar, thank you.
Oh, go.